Okay, good morning. How's everyone's Sunday morning going? Very well. We are here to talk about the weaponization of the FTC and other agencies. I'm going to go through and let the panelists introduce themselves in a minute, and then we'll get started on the topic. But a few things, sort of logistical things first. We are recording the panel, so if you have any questions, we do need you to come to the middle and stand at that mic so that we can hear your question on the video. And if you do have any questions at any time, stand up, go to the mic. We're not going to necessarily wait for a Q&A at the end. We're not going to make everybody hold questions. If you have something you want to ask, just go ahead and step up, ask your question, and we're happy to address it. My name is Mihill. I'm a local attorney here in Atlanta. I'm a business and IP attorney. I've been speaking on the EFF track for more than 15 years now. Can't even remember how many. I'm here today to be the moderator of this panel. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I'm Tien. I'm the legislative director for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We're a civil liberties support nonprofit based out of San Francisco, California. This is only my second DragonCon. My first was in 2002. Thanks to Scott, and I'm back today. It's great to be here.
Hi, I'm Matthew Lane, Senior Policy Counsel at Back to the Future. We are similarly a society organization dedicated to addressing issues at the intersection of human rights and technology.
Hey y'all, I'm Sarah Phillips. I use she/they pronouns. I'm a campaigner at Fight for the Future. As Matt said, we run national campaigns against censorship and surveillance. My work particularly is around free expression, abortion surveillance, and how LGBTQ youth interact with the internet. I'm from Texas, based in Texas, and I come out of abortion access organizing in the South.
All right. Well, let's just start with some of the basics. What does it mean to weaponize an agency like the FCC or FEC or something like that? What are some of the examples of what's been done to weaponize those against the public?
So I'll start. I'm going to be focusing today on the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. I think Matt's going to be talking a lot about the federal. Sarah will be probably talking about both. The thing about the Federal Communications is that it has a lot of power for a lot of like regulatory authority over sort of basically two areas. What we used to call the broadcast media, now we call it mass media. And then it also has authority over common carriers and a lot of telecom. So most of what we have seen in this presidential administration publicly has been a lot of work by the FCC to investigate or to open inquiries into what media outlets are doing. And I'll give you just a few examples. So in January of this year, the FCC went after NPR and PBS member stations. It also went after some of the networks over their election coverage. But in particular, they were really going after CBS because of its 60 Minutes interview of Kamala Harris during the election. In February, they went after KCBS, which is a San Francisco radio station, because KCBS on the air shared ICE agents' location, immigration enforcement. In April, they threatened a news distortion inquiry against MSNBC, the cable news network, for not airing some White House conference. In July, they opened up an investigation into Comcast, which owns NBC, and Disney, which owns ABC, about their affiliate relationships. But this is, just more pressure. And then in August, they imposed an ombudsman requirement on top of CBS as part of the merger between Paramount and Skydance. And as we all know, the Colbert Show was canceled, and there's a lot of sense to that because that's what the administration wanted. So you can see in that list, and it's not complete, but there's a lot that they have the ability to sort of weaponized by aiming the investigatory power of the agency and making news about its own bully pulpit and constantly trying to chill the speech or the activities of these entities. And all of this was presaged in the FCC's chapter on Project 2025, which was uh, the plan for what the Republicans were going to do when they took over the White House. And the current chairperson of the FCC, Brendan Carr, was the author of that Project 2025 chapter. So those are some.
I want to zoom out a little bit. How many of y'all play board games? How many of y'all play D&D or TTRPG? Imagine that you played a game with someone for years, and then one day they find themselves in a position of power. They're the GM, and they're just really up in the board game, and they repay every slight over those years. 10, 20, 50 times over, and just make everyone at the table miserable. That's kind of what's going on here. This is, not just me, guessing that. I mean, a lot of the interviews, they are quite explicit. They feel like this is a quote unquote rebalancing of policies. They, at the FCC and a few other administrative agencies, are very explicitly and expressly adopting policies, making statements, putting pressure on companies for the political benefit of the administrative party. And that's not problematic. I know that there have been a lot of controversies over the years where there have been claims of partisanship or attacks. Those have all been debatable and directed at sort of things that sort of have some tethering to legitimate government purpose. But in this instance, they are kind of saying, we believe you did this to us over all of these years, so we're going to pay it back as hard as we can. In the sort of FTC space where I'm familiar the most, because I've recently done some of these issues, they've done things like open up comments that were basically only sort of soliciting from conservatives. They have one open on DEI practices where you can kind of cut out employer if you say that they are too woke. They have a request for information open on sort of anti-conservative censorship. If you think the platform has been conservative, obviously they think that censorship is pervasive across the board. It's often felt by marginalized communities. I don't imagine that comments are carrying on weight or that anyone really cares about them. They have also sort of taken over the workshop process, which is kind of disheartening because workshops were sort of invented a few decades ago. I recently got to meet the woman who started the first workshop in this program. Basically, the idea is to invite a bunch of different voices and experts from across the spectrum on side, with different beliefs and different sets of data. And you sort of put them in front of staff. You say, here is the spectrum of everything that's available. Please educate our staff on these issues. It's very nonpartisan, it's very political. There have been 2 workshops run so far. One was on kid safety. All of the people invited were exclusively partisan folks, largely tied to Christian conservatives and sort of their beliefs. The other one was a workshop on gender affirming care, that they only invited folks that had views that gender affirming care was, improper, that, being trans is not real, gender dysphoria is not real. Those kinds of viewpoints, that is kind of weird, not only because of how one-sided it was, but also because the FTC has no real authority in the space. They're not a medical organization or agency who have no ability or expertise to analyze these data. They don't have anything to do with it once they get it because they don't really have any oversight over doctors or medical care. And so it seemed largely just to generate news and attention on sort of a specific political viewpoint. Additionally, there seems to be some clear sort of favoritism just among like very wealthy individuals and corporations, which is problematic for an agency that's almost entirely dedicated towards breaking up monopolies and preventing concentration. An example of that is that Media Matters obviously has been sued by Elon Musk for doing some reporting around ads displaying near and that scared at the time a lot of advertisers of the platform. The FCC opened up an investigation of Media Matters, and partly due to that and its other legal troubles, Media Matters has had to lay off a lot of its people and quite substantially in their operations.
Yeah, and maybe I could speak to some of the like larger political context here on like how the FTC was largely treated before this. A lot of my work has been around the Kids Online Safety Act, which is a bill that's been reintroduced a couple of times now. And the previous versions of the bill, the enforcement mechanism was state attorneys general, which people were really worried about. This would give state attorneys general, like in Texas, Ken Paxton in my state, for example, control over speech, the power to pressure companies to take certain speech that he didn't like down. There was like clear bias involved. There was clear threat that the state attorneys generals that were right-wing and conservative and invested in culture war issues to use this in obviously biased ways against trans people, against LGBTQ people, against abortion access online. And one of the interesting things here is that when this bill was rewritten, the enforcement mechanism was changed to the FTC. I mean, the EFF and the ACLU and Back to the Future had consistently insisted that the issue was the bill, not the enforcement mechanism. Regardless of who is actually doing the enforcement, it's a censorship bill and gives government control over speech. But in terms of the politics of it, on the Hill, the idea was, well, the FTC is a neutral, unbiased entity that will always do good. And we said over and over again, like, you have to imagine the worst case scenario of what the FTC could do. But largely before this Trump administration, because of the way the FTC is run, people who are appointed to the FTC have longevity past the administration that appoints them. So there's this idea that it'll be fine, they'll always do the right thing. And I always felt like that was very short-sighted, and we said that over and over again. But I think we're kind of doing the thing of like, I told you so here, because we're just, the same FTC is holding workshops targeting gender-affirming healthcare for kids, and doing it in an obviously very biased way. And that same FTC, if this same bill passed, would have enforcement, would be able to pressure social media companies to take down speech that they don't like. And so in terms of weaponization, I think there's the outright, like kind of like clear-cut ways that the FTC is being weaponized here. And then there's also the more subtle ways of just kind of trusting that these agencies will always act in an unbiased manner that's being challenged here. And then, so even on like the Congressional Hill side of things, we have to question when they say things like, of course the FTC should be the enforcement, that everything's fixed if the FTC is doing this. And the other thing that I'll also say is that the Project 2025 stuff that Lee's mentioned, Brendan Carr, who's the chair of the FCC, Andrew Ferguson is chair of the FTC, were both very much involved in the Project 2025, like both in the writing and also furthering that narrative. There was a leaked memo when Andrew Ferguson was up for running for the FTC chair of they circulate memos on like why they're the best guy for the job. And one of the things on his that was really interesting when it was leaked is that he very much was leaning into the Project 2025 narrative. He explicitly said in the memo that he would quote unquote fight back against the trans agenda. Again, running for the chair of, going up for the chair of the FTC that supposedly shouldn't have any jurisdiction over that. And so it was kind of already in the cards, and now we're seeing the fruits of that in how the FTC is being run.
So I want to jump in here for a second to amplify what Sarah was saying. because you've also all probably noticed in the news a lot of firings or resignations. So just to step back and sort of outline the way that these two work, right? They're both run by boards, by a collective entity of 5 commissioners. And so the commissioners it's always been the case that there's a lean on how the agencies are politically, because you're going to like get 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, or 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And, while it's technically independent, the person who appoints them is the president, and they do receive Senate confirmation. But and so what we have seen is a lot of firings and resignations. And there's ongoing litigation about whether or not they could be legitimately fired without cause, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole overlay that we will not get into beyond even my legal act. I am a lawyer, to get into what executive power over these kinds of board-led agencies are. But one of the things that that whole debate over hirings and firings of board members is about the power to decide who actually runs these agencies. And that's why knowing what they've said before is a really good guide to things. At the same time, I also want to emphasize that, at least on the FCC side, we actually aren't able to see what they're really going to do. Because, for example, the FCC did not even have a quorum of commissioners. They did not have the 3 commissioners needed until June 23rd, when a second Republican, Olivia Trusty, was actually put on the commission. So up until then, they only had 2. So Chairman Carr, even in February, could open things sort of at an executive way, can sort of use the agency as a bully pulpit. But legally, they would not have been able to actually promulgate rules, et cetera, although that is also something that doesn't usually stop this administration. The one other thing I'll say about is I've spoken at past FTC workshops, and I'll tell you, back in like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was always complaining about these FTC workshops because they were too business friendly. And they were, it's like maybe I'm a privacy lawyer, right? So I'd go in there and talk about commercial privacy. There would only be one of me, maybe someone from Epic or like that, and then there would just be a huge number of industry people. So the FTC, I don't want to make either of these agencies sound like they were great. Honestly, EFF was very skeptical about the FCC for many years, but for the reason that we were worried about the power that they exercised. When we finally sort of changed our minds about that, we were supporting, for instance, net neutrality at the FCC. And they eventually got there, but of course that is not there anymore. So I just wanted to inject that.
Just to clarify on the FTC point, so the board is bipartisan in that the ruling party, the administration's party, gets 3 seats and the minority party gets 2, which means that technically all business can be done without the minority, but the minority is there to sort of force debate and push towards bipartisanship. As a longtime FTC watcher, I'm not sure about the FCC, but that has actually held sway there culturally, that there was a lot of camaraderie, there was a lot of, well, we have differences in opinion and how aggressive to be against businesses, but we still agree in the mission, and that is completely gone today. especially after the legal firings of the two Democratic commissioners. There's now no Democrats on the FTC board, and there's sort of no ability for any of them to sort of force discussion or open debate or things about anything, showing the other side or the other perspective.
Yeah, Paul Rowe's a friend of mine.
So Lee, you mentioned the net neutrality issue. One of the things we've talked about on this track for many years is issues arising out of challenges to Section 230 and actions on that. The FTC has said that they're going to propose new rulemaking on Section 230. You want to address that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to get into all the details of 230. It's obviously always been controversial. We support 230 strongly. We think that it helps protect people's speech rights by protecting a lot of speakers online. But it is the mission of Chairman Carr to kill Section 230. In one of the big parts of the Project 2025 chapter was reining in big tech and trying to kill Section 230. Now, the thing that's weird, or at least that made me laugh, is that it doesn't have the, as far as I can tell, he has no authority. The FCC doesn't have the power to, by itself as an agency, undo an act of, a provision of federal law. I mean, this is in the U.S. Code. Agencies do not get to, Congress does that. Congress and the president. Yep. The FCC does not. But, there's still talk about it as though they could. One of the two other things I'll just mention. One other thing I'll mention, also relevant to the net neutrality question, is that in the Project 2025 chapter, Carr also talks about the Universal Service Fund, which is money that telcos pay to help support a lot of low income access, et cetera, to the telecom services. But this administration has always wanted to really move towards network usage fees that would require websites and what they call big tech to pay ISPs for the privilege of connecting to the network. And the experience with these sorts of things is that it is exercised in a very, very unbalanced way. South Korea, I think they've implemented network usage fees, and it's really hurting innovation there. So,
Can I just ask how many of y'all know what Section 230 is? Okay, I think we should probably start there. Just because I think I want to set the scene. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is basically what protects your ability to post on social media online.
First Amendment.
Well, yeah.
But unfortunately, First Amendment is taking more hits.
Yes, and I think more in the practicality side, it is presented by Congress often as a liability shield for social media companies, but in actuality, it protects you from your content being taken down because it protects the companies from having liability over what you post, right? So it protects them from lawsuits over, if I post something on Twitter, maybe a bad example, if I post something on Blue Sky, Blue Sky's not responsible for what I say. And what we see with Section 230 and why we want to protect Section 230 at this point is that we don't want, if, for example, in Texas, I bring this up a lot, right? If in Texas abortion is banned, right? If Blue Sky is responsible for every post I make about abortion in Texas, that presents liability for them from the state of Texas, right? If we want free speech online, if we want to be able to post content and have user-generated content online, which we do want, we want you to have that ability. Section 230 protects that. And the energy in Congress has been by protecting it by saying that Section 230 is a win for big tech, kind of obfuscates the issue of what actually creates that ability for you to post. And there's a lot of energy in comment. They talk about repealing or sunsetting or like Section 230 every year, every hearing on kids safety, every hearing on online issues. They have to say a little bit at the end. We need to look at Section 230. We need to repeal or sunset Section 230. Dick Durbin, I think, was signaling that he wants it to be a swan song as he finally,
I mean, it's just,
it's really stupid. I just wanted to say though that there is, you hear that word a lot, but a lot of people don't know what it is or what it means. We have on Fight for the Future, we have a site called badinternetbills.com, and there's more detail about Section 230 if you're interested in that, because I feel like people bat it around a lot. But I do think it's a real threat. I mean, I think that whether or not it actually happens this Congress, I think is a different issue, but they do love to say it. Like they love to, knock it down. They love to bring it up because it's their little political win to say that we're regulating big tech by just saying that we're going to repeal Section 230 while not really having an in-depth understanding of why people are actually able to use the internet the way that they can.
Yeah, so let me just expand on the 230 stuff. So, it came out back when the CDA, Communication Decency Act, was actually enacted. And in the early days, what we saw there were these two cases involving CompuServe and Prodigy, where different results were reached on whether or not those services would be liable for the speech of someone, a user, who had, and the context was defamation, right? It's like, oh, if I use a chat room and I slander someone or libel someone, then can the carrier be sued for what I said? And what back then realized is that if every bulletin board service, and that's what we were a lot dealing with back in the late 90s, could be sued for anything that one of us said, what a user said, they're not going to be there. They're just not going to exist. So the purpose, the reason behind 230 back then, and it's the same idea today, is that this is what allows ordinary users of the internet to actually have forums or places where they can say things on the internet without somebody, the carrier or some other platform being sued. Now, today, in the age of social media, where social media is routinely demonized for harming the children, et cetera, then the ability of users to say things looks like a adapting to those who are very partisan. But the part that they're trying, and because now media companies, big tech is very big, so they're saying you don't need the shield of 230 anymore. Well, EFF's an official position, so that's that we do need it in order to protect all the speech of all the people on the internet. So I just wanted to give that slight historical background.
Okay, so in that same vein, what do you think this administration's next steps are going to be to limit speech that they don't like? That might be a big question to ask. What do you foresee as their next steps to take to limit the speech of us if it's something that they don't want to hear?
Well, I mean, this is a theme that we've had for several days now, but the way I see it, the way that I don't know what others think, but I use the term segregate and suppress yesterday on a panel. And what they do is they figure out who they can safely attack, and they show that group, and they are able to build legislation or encourage other actors, whether it's state attorneys general or state legislatures, to enact or to do things that are harmful to that community. And then they move on, right?
Yeah.
It's we'll pick you off one
Divide and
by
conquer.
one.
Yeah, I think that, so what I've seen so far is that There isn't necessarily an organized campaign of it's very sporadic, but it's intentional, and it is almost entirely based around putting the thumb on the scale towards elevating certain conservative speech and suppressing certain left-aligned speech. And I think if I brought up the Media Matters example, there's also another thing that I should bring up called jawboning, which is I don't know coin the term, but it's basically the idea that if you are an agency leader or you're in a position of power in the government, that what you say to companies matter because there is the implicit threat of the force of your agency behind that person. And so, whenever you make any statement that might imply that they could face investigation or harassment or costs if they don't comply with something, that would be job owning. So it's not officially opening an investigation. It's not officially taking an action, but it's sort of like
Veiled threat.
yes.
Yeah,
And
it's
so-
also called raised eyebrow regulation.
Yeah, and so just to bring Brendan Carr, the chair of the FCC, back in this, there was two public instances of job owning that happened recently reported. One was around a conservative network that I have honestly never heard of before. I mean, look up the name. It is. Where's this? Okay, well, I don't have it right at my fingertips. Oh, Great American Media. And apparently they weren't invited to join the YouTube TV platform, in which, they could get paid for being on there. And Brendan Carr publicly, criticized YouTube TV for not paying this small channel, and allowing them to be on the platform. The second one was around a contract dispute between Fox, the overall media corporation, and YouTube TV. It could have ended, or at least temporarily ended, in Fox not being on the platform while they negotiated particular things. And Brendan Park tweeted at YouTube TV was like, "You need to settle this and make sure that Fox stays on your platform."
I mean, in the investigation I mentioned from January into PBS and NPR for their election coverage is a classic example, right? That there's nothing there, but he said, "Well, we're going to investigate what's advertising and what's not, because they're not supposed to be showing applicants." And all of this is like, okay, we're watching, and we know now what's happened to NPR and PBS funding. But that's not what Carr did. But these are all examples of how they publicly bully the bad guys. They think are the bad guys. They are always propping up the folks that they like. So it's just a huge amount of partisanship and lack of neutrality in the way they approach things. And it's not from a principled sort of like we're trying to achieve this policy. More like we don't like it.
And this is just my opinion, but it's the reason why it seems to be so sporadic is that these people are political actors, and obviously, theoretically, Trump is term limited. There should be a power vacuum, and so it seems to be directed at whatever sort of Trump is angry about and tweets about. There is suddenly now, either job owning or threats of investigation or other things that tend to focus on those targets. Or sort of other sort of wealthy conservative donors like Elon Musk, contributed probably the most to any party of the individual ever. So yeah.
Next way.
Under the FCC's current scope, what reach does it have over independent news media on YouTube? And with the recent Supreme Court decisions and the blatant disregard of rulings, why do we continue to frame this like there is a legitimate legal challenge to what is being done?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, there are a lot of areas, for instance, like with the 230 of this thing, they don't have authority to actually repeal 230, but they talk about it, but it's still on the board as we will repeal 230. And it fits with the entire sort of administration's approach to the law, which is
We don't
actually sort of don't care
Yeah.
what the law says. We are going to take action because we are the executive branch and we actually have the guns and whatnot. And so you try and stop us with your laws. And so we fight these in court because there are only really two places to fight: the courts and in Congress. And unfortunately, Congress is completely controlled by the President's party. So you have the trifecta. And then because the Supreme Court is dominated by the Republican majority, even when lower courts make rulings in accordance with what we think the law is or should be, then at some point it gets up to the Supreme Court. And we're seeing examples of where they're saying, well, you thought that was the law, but it's actually not. And so what they've done more generally there is to destabilize, denormalize any sense of certainty or predictability in what the law is. And everything seems like, well, so like if you're a lawyer in private practice, you're advising your client about what should we do? What's the law? I used to be able to say, these are the rules and they're violating them. And if you fight this, you will win. I can't, it's a lot harder to say that now, right?
Yeah, even on things like First Amendment stuff. I mean, you're right. All the things we're talking about are violative of the First Amendment. Legal challenges can be made, but those legal challenges have to be made. Those legal challenges cost money. Those legal challenges are something that take time. And then they ignore it. We all thought something would happen with some of these other rulings, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, we used to call it FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You scare people about what might happen. Then suddenly their individual calculus, even though collectively we might, like, if we were all able to get together and decide, we're gonna resist. But if you're the one that's being aimed at, you're making your calculus about, well, do I back down or do I fight? A lot of folks are just gonna scurry away, and that happens enough so that a lot of people, and honestly, this happens with members of Congress as well. They know there's a lot of shenanigans, but they also want to hold their seats, and they know kind of who can swing their primaries or who gets even chosen to run in a given district, and that chills them too.
And there are efforts being made. So the Congress, it just in the last few months, the Broadcast Freedom and Independence Act was proposed, which would be explicitly to fight this type of directed targeting of media. But as Lee said, it's the Congress is not.
Who proposed
I mean,
that?
Don't think of the senator's name, but I'll find out for you.
right, but I, as a legislative director at EFF, my people deal with Congress day in and day out, and one of the things that you have to remember about Congress, whether it's the House or the Senate, is that the party that has the majority controls every single committee. They pick the committee chairs. That means they pick
Which
the
bills get out?
agenda. That means that when I am talking to Democratic senators and representatives all the time, and they're basically potted plants in the corner as far as any committee goes, right? They don't necessarily get the briefings, and if there are 5 witnesses, they're lucky if they get 1. The amount of power that the committee chairs and the committees have in Congress to sort of skew or control the agenda is immense. And the current administration is exercising that power very, very aggressively, ruthlessly. I mean,
And I mean, I think one thing I want to add there also is that I think we're talking specifically about agencies, but I also say I don't feel like we have like a deep well on either party on like censorship issues. Like I mean, I work mostly on the legislative side, like on free expression issues, and we don't have like a deep bench of progressive lawmakers who understand that these bills like HOSA or that bills that attack encryption or bills that attack open source software are free expression issues, are surveillance issues, and that we need to fight that. We don't have that deep bench on with regardless of the party. So I think there's also that extra bit of their understanding that the agencies are being weaponized in this way under the Trump administration, but we need to build that. I don't know, Matt can probably talk about this more, but we don't have that.
On censorship issues, our champions in the Senate are basically Ron Wyden and Rand Paul.
Yeah.
And it used to be Mike Lee, but then Mike Lee got this kick on banning pornography, and he's no longer a fan of censorship. I just want to make 2 points. One is, I think, more directed to the questions about independent media. FCC and other agencies don't really have direct authority capability there. It's largely job owning around sort of lifting up voices that agree with them and sort of threatening, oh, this voice seems to be getting too much play. Are you manipulating the algorithms to boost them because you're engaging in people on them? Maybe we should investigate that. The major agencies have a lot more direct stake because of artifacts of history, largely around licensing because they occupy certain public spectrums of airwaves, and that was regulated and they gave the government authority over them. I'm an expert in that area. I do know that one of the key sort of swords of Damocles that they're hanging over them is revoking their license, which would destroy the company completely. And the other thing that I really wanted to bring up as a point is that there are actually some conservatives that are becoming outspoken on a lot of this stuff because, and to Lee's earlier point, these agencies aren't perfect. There's always been complaints about partisanship. There's always been complaints about activities that have verged on political. There's always been complaints about corporate capture, meaning corporations have too much say in these agencies. The public did not have no say. But this administration seems to be taking all that into given and springing the standard operating procedure, and that they are very clearly and expressly signaling to corporations that if you advantage us politically, we'll advantage you economically. This happened the merger with Paramount Skydance. This happened in the Omicron merger at NTC. This has happened, in quite a lot of other areas, and so that has actually scared conservatives. Who are wait, there is theoretically a future in which Democrats can take control, and what are they going to do with this power? And so I think that is interesting.
one more really quick point on the censorship. It is indeed, censorship is a bipartisan thing. That is one of the reasons why the First Amendment is so important, because that is something that historically has been the biggest bulwark against congressional attempts at censorship. Does anybody in this room remember who Tipper Gore is? So, Alan Tipper Gore and the Parents Media Research Coalition, I think, PMRC. They're one of the reasons why, we were never all that. The Democrats are there too, right, in terms of wanting to censor. It's just what they want to censor. They want, back in those days, it was drug lyrics and it might be rap violence and they might something else. But there's always something that they want to hit at, and hitting at people talking about it is the authority to play. So we always relied heavily on the courts and the First Amendment to try to check Congress's sort of inherent political incentives to get into to censor things. And the funny thing about the progressive side is that, or not progressive side, but a lot of the mainline Democrats, we'd go to their offices like, this is unconstitutional. Why are you doing this? And they're going, it's going to help me. I mean, fundamentally, the calculus, it's going to help me. And then we know the courts are going to make it unconstitutional. So it's not actually going to hurt anything.
You can campaign on it, like it's all like.
It's cynical as hell, but I'm utterly serious. They say, but you guys are going to litigate the cases.
Yeah,
And
like
you're
we'll just
gonna
sue.
You'll fix
We'll pass
that
it.
problem.
I'll just sue.
You'll fix
It's like-
that problem.
Yeah. These
Sure,
are real
for
things
your
that people
question.
say. Yeah.
The answer to the question, the bill, the Broadcast Freedom Information Act was introduced on March 6th by Ben Ray, John,
Good job.
I don't know how to say his name, New Mexico. And it was also Jackie Rosen and Edward Mark from Nevada, Massachusetts. But all Democrats.
Yeah, and so it will not
Bill
be,
is-
it will not move. It will not move.
It'll never get out of
No way.
committee.
So
That's right.
You have a question?
Maybe not in some of the tactics that you guys have discussed, but do you see any potential advantage to the recent Supreme Court case last year that overturned Chevron deference, helping to prevent policies moving forward?
that was going to be my next question. So yeah, let's talk about Chevron deference and the low right case.
Just to give a quick background, and I'm sure Lee has some thoughts on this, but the key irony of Chevron was that it was largely a reaction to progressive or courts that were viewed as run by progressive judges striking down conservative laws in the Reagan administration. And that was sort of the foundation of this case law was to protect actions by the Reagan administration, the conservative administration. But in the intervening time, those things have been flipped and it was seen as a tool So the striking down of it was interesting to me in that when the administration was coming in, all of a sudden they didn't have the protections. So Chevron doctrine basically meant that any agency that made an interpretation that seemed to be in good faith, it was just blessed by the courts. No questions asked. The assumption would be that they are the experts, they know what's going on. We don't need to look at this.
If Congress had not spoken
Yeah,
to
Congress-
the issue, right?
Direct.
Congress legislates in broad, sort of sweeping terms. It doesn't always spell out what it wants. Within the system of the agency growth, the fundamental theory at the beginning from the New Deal was they were going to be more technocratic, and their expertise, scientific, technical, whatever, like think about the EPA, emissions and particulates and what's harmful. They were going to figure out what the answer was, given the sort of general public interest mission that Congress would give them. And so there was a lot of details, and that Congress could never deal with.
Yeah, that's actually very important politically because either in reaction to Chevron or just in reaction to the practicalities of having 535 people that don't always see eye to eye, it's really hard to agree on like detailed, specific language on how to do anything. And so when they can't agree, they say, wow, we'll just keep it vague and some agency will figure it out. And so in the intervening time since Chevron, like Congress has basically forgotten how to legislate with the granularity, with the specificity that is necessary to even like make these laws work. So that's sort of one of my comments on Chevron.
But so then, you get back to the question, I think, which was, so does the shifting from Chevron to local right, what does it do? So what it means is that everything that an agency has done under the old Chevron deference becomes opened up because now the courts get to look at it and say, well, that's actually actually not the right thing. They don't, and when we say defer, it's like in a closed case, who gets to decide? Who do we think is more right? And so now, and they basically said, hey, unelected agents are not right. But under the local right stuff, it's sort of like, well, judges then get to decide, and then they will kick it back. And they can often kick it back to Congress. So imagine whatever the rules, however the landscape terrain of them are right now, the only thing the local right does is it means that any existing rule is more easily challenged because it was constructed in an old regime. And so if, say, if the rules favored the color green before, now they're not going to favor the color green, but it doesn't make it any easier for an agency itself to make a rule. So the way I look at what it's doing is it's actually making it much harder for there to be any sort of regulation at all, which, in some areas, if you think that things are currently overregulated, well, then you might think that's a good thing. If on the other hand, you see, we have problems ahead that are going to need regulation. You are paralyzing, or you're making it much harder for the agencies to do that. And even if they did do that, then their rules would be immediately challenged. And because it's really unstable how we're going to decide things without Chevron deference, it made it a little easier, just as Congress doesn't have the expertise to decide things. Well, courts don't either. So it's essentially taking, to me, is essentially sort of saying, yeah, science or whatever the experts say doesn't count as much. And we're relying much, much more on what judges and members of Congress think. And, as in tech policy, I think that's a very, very dangerous thing, because it means much less is being done based on what actual experts in the area think, and much more on vibes and politics. So, that's my take.
Yeah, I think in theory, it sort of weakens agencies, including the current Trump administration. But the problem is that litigation is very expensive. And so I think there's this term that's become popularized called lawfare. Lawfare is done across the board, bipartisan, corporations, society. But because of the tremendous expense of a lot of this litigation, the opportunities are more on the corporate side. So if you are a corporation, you hate or you're regulated, it opens the door for you to engage in this lawfare to sort of reshape all the policies around what you want through sort of just jamming the system up with a lot of lawyers and litigation. And so that, I think, is where a lot of the danger comes.
The lawfare basically favors the rich.
Yes.
It always has. It always has.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna derail it a little bit.
We've got 5 minutes left.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the Trump administration. One of the things that I'm seriously concerned about, if it is no longer the Trump administration, it is the Vance administration, because his backers are very different and have I would think, a whole different agenda. And how are we watching this and preparing for this as well?
I will jump on that just because I think there's only one thing that really, well, it's not one thing, but as DC politics, this level of politics is very dependent on the composition of Congress, right? And so when you look at this administration, the next sort of checkpoint is the 2026 midterm elections. That will determine, to a large extent, what can be done in the next 2 years, but also what the political map looks like in terms of what happened in 2028. Now, I mean, political speculation now, it's way too early to tell, although you're asking the right question. Who is, and this is the case for both parties, right? Because will be no incumbent running in 2028, assuming that the elections actually do occur.
He has
And
had.
that exactly, right. But I mean, we don't know who the Democrats are gonna run. Clearly, J.D. Vance has the, sort of wears the mantle of heir apparent, but we're still learning more and more about Vance. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts that I won't get into, but I mean, he's not, just because he's the name now doesn't mean be the name later. And it's kind of like Game of Thrones or Warring or the Warring States period or Sengoku or whatever. There's a lot of factions within both parties that are jockeying for primacy, and there's going to be a lot of money in deal making around how that looks. But for our practical purposes, how the 2026 election in Congress go, every single seat in the House is always up every year, right? All 435 representatives, their seats are open. Who gets there, who is there when the dust settles, is going to determine a lot. The Senate, a third of the Senate, I don't remember if it's 33 or 30. So, they've got the staggered 60-year terms. But, and then you look at that map, and that will determine, for instance, whether or not if they go to the Senate, they'll be able to continue to confirm whatever judge that they have the right majority.
I just worry with, we have seen unprecedented use of executive orders. And if the mantle passes from Trump to J.D. Vance, I expect that to continue.
Yeah, so politics is definitely an exercise in coalition building.
Yeah.
And J.D. Vance's coalition seems to be hyper specific to the venture capitalist and sort of investor culture that he came from, which is a lot of Peter Thiel, Palantir, AI, surveillance,
Right.
all of that stuff. I think will become more of a problem. J.D. Vance, I think. I've done a little research into him. Not a lot, but I think one of the things that is interesting is that he was fairly, to use a technical term, normie prior to sort of Trumpism, and he seems to be fully bought in on the unitary executive theory of the absolute power of the president, the ability to sort of deploy it, and so I am curious as to whether or not he would recede from that and go back to normally like I have feeling doesn't, and he probably sees what he can get him. I don't know what coalitions he would try to sort of wrap up into if he became president. But I think that the clearest sort of coalition he responds to is that sort of conservative tech bro, Silicon Valley.
And I don't think there are a lot of votes there. There's a lot of money there.
There's a lot of money there.
Yeah.
But I don't know where the votes are.
Money can be used to get votes if you are in any way, shape, or form charismatic, which J.D. Vance
All right, we're down to the last minute or two here, so I'd like to go ahead and get final closing thoughts. Maybe we start with Sarah and work our way back.
God, I think we talked about a lot here. I think there's a lot of acronyms, terms being thrown around. There's a lot of questions. I mean, even your question, there's also redistricting going on. There's a lot up in the air. I think with my work specifically, I encourage people to, when people say who they are, believe them. I think we talk about Project 2025 in an interesting way. I think growing up in Texas and also being involved in Texas politics before this, a lot of this has been coming down the pipe, in Georgia and Mississippi and Alabama and Texas and a lot of these places, and now we're kind of seeing it at the federal level. So I think, one, with the agencies, they're now given the power to do a lot of these things that Project 2025 lays out. And I do encourage people to read it. I mean, I think we reference it a lot, but I think that it's a document you can Control F on a lot of these issues, and you should take it for what it is. Like, they wrote it down, they want to do it. It is their plan with the JD Vance of it all too. Like, we are in a surveillance state with more and more censorship, more and more of what you see, and data that's being collected on you is being controlled by a lot of these people, right? And we want agencies to be able to curtail that power, to be able to break up corporations and do antitrust work and hold corporations to some standard, but we're not in that moment right now. And so, as far as fight is concerned, we're running national campaigns against censorship and surveillance, and we're not going to stop because these agencies are doing so. So I'll just name a couple of things. BadInternetBills.com is where I run a lot of these campaigns. Stop Online ID Checks is about age verification. Basically, like, flash your ID laws online are very popular right now, and a lot of sites are taking them on in pre-compliance. We're going to keep doing stuff around FTC and FCC as they continue weaponizing their power. So I think pay attention to what's going on. Like, we do protest when the FTC is doing these things. It's not like they're just happening in a vacuum. People are very active on these issues. So if you're called to do so, there is opportunity to get involved.
I think that, the naked use of the power of the state to reward allies and harm opponents should be concerning to everyone, no matter what their politics are. One interesting data point I have is that I was in strictly competition law before I became policy director, but now I do everything. But I dealt with the FCC quite a lot, and Trump won. It was weird in that there was a lot of Democratic and left aligned competition, sort of site organization buy-in on the Trump administration's action. FCC was run at the time by a few Democrats and some Republicans. They agreed on a lot of stuff. They were a little bit more aggressive than sort of on pursuing power and big tech, and there was sort of a coalition built around, maybe not politically, they wouldn't vote for each of these candidates, but in terms of getting things done mission, it had a lot of legitimacy. And what we're seeing now is a complete collapse of just the legitimacy of the government. And I think that is just terrible. I think that, across the board, we're going to see maybe just new space in your government looking out for it. And I don't think that's good.
All I want to say is that I think that it's everyone who can make your voice heard. That's not just in your voting, it's in your, not just at the national level, that's at the local level, at the state level, at the city level, at the county level. Talk to folks, work with others, help, register people to vote, protect people's right to vote. This does require this is going to require a political mass movement to actually arrest the momentum. And 2026 is very, very important time. That's all I have to say.